Joining us now, Ambassador Francis Rooney. He was an ambassador to the Holy See from 2005 to 2008, appointed by President George W. Bush. He has a new book called The Global Vatican, and very fitting as Pope Francis arrives in the U.S. Ambassador, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me on, Brett.
You know, as the Pope arrives here, there is such a thought of seeing what he says from across the sea through a political lens. And it's interesting to hear everyone digest what he says about various issues. You know, as you look at how this Pope has reached out to people and talked about things, what's your feeling?
Well, I think he's kind of positioned himself as the consummate moral authority in the world, reaching out on some of these overarching issues that, as you say, have global implication, not just here in the center of the universe. And I think our perspective on him may be a little narrow versus his perspective of looking at whether it's refugees and migrants all around the world, looking at the environmental damage all around the world. And I think it's going to be very interesting how he focuses his message and tailors it to a United States audience, both at Congress and in his homilies here.
You were appointed by President Bush. You talked to a bunch of conservatives, and when they talk about the Pope, there is some angst in some corners about his positions and how it falls with the Republican Party, for example.
Well, I think there's a great deal of angst on the part of some very doctrinaire Catholics about his welcoming tone concerning some of the life issues, and he's caused a bit of an uproar in that respect. In terms of the economic positions that he's taken, I think he's caused some angst among many of us conservative, liberal economic believers who feel that the United States system of free enterprise combined with personal liberty is the greatest gift to humanity that there has ever been, has created more opportunity for more people than any system. I really hope the Pope learns a little bit about us when he's here.
Yeah, because he sees it perhaps through a prism of where he grew up and where he served in Buenos Aires.
I think definitely the case. He's from a country that is autocratic, that has spent 60 years spinning itself into oblivion, which at the turn of the century was as big or bigger than the United States economy, and where the companies are oligopolistic, and many of whom are cronies with the state and cronies with each other, these huge families, and they don't provide for their people. And I don't think there's a safety net in Argentina to care for the poor.
So the link between capitalism and maybe corporatism is pretty short in Argentina.
Exactly. And so his experience is totally different than what we know. When he says inequality of wealth, we're in the hash marks of inequality of wealth compared to a place like Argentina, which is way out on the sidelines, you know.
In your book, you talk about your time and U.S. Vatican relations. How has that evolved?
Well, it's been very interesting to see the shift from back a little bit back from Pope John Paul's kind of aggressive, personal, engaged diplomacy when he went to Poland, when he went to Nicaragua and things like that. It's almost like they've reversed back to more of the old Ostpolitik, where they were playing for the long ball, more of a quiet diplomacy. Look what happened in Cuba. He didn't meet with the dissidents, neither did Benedict, although many young Monsignors in the Vatican were hoping he was going to meet with the Damas de Blanco. And so I think that might have been a missed opportunity from my point of view, but from their point of view, I think they're pursuing more of a
long-term
containment long-term, waiting the Castros out, if you will.
Pope Francis is not a veteran of the Curia. He is not an insider in the Vatican. He is somebody who comes from the outside and is shaking things up. Is that shakeup happening?
I think it is, and I think it's really important what he's doing with the Vatican Bank and the Curia. Before the conclave, I believe it was Cardinal Wuerl who said we need more of an American executive style of governance here to be able to react with speed and clarity that the modern world of communications and technology demands. And so I think the Pope's on a strong ground there trying to do that.
It's a different time, too, in that not only is the U.S. facing threats, but the Vatican is facing threats from ISIS directly. This is a different environment. You served during a time where the war on terror really started, and now it's evolved. The Vatican's taking direct threats all the time.
It's a serious situation. You know, when we were going to ambassador school, some of the other ambassador candidates that were there with me and Kathleen we're saying, well, you don't have to worry about security. You're going to be with the Holy See. Truth and in fact, the State Department had Italy and the Holy See as a couple of the very highest security threats even back then because of the antipathy towards the church by the radicalized elements of Islam.
Is there a sense that his message here in the U.S. is going to be on different tiers? You know, everybody's going to hear something that they can get behind.
I think that's probably the case. I think he's going to keep it high, 30,000 feet, broad brush principles. I'm sure he will refer to his fundamental diplomatic outreach around the environment, around immigration. He may even get into the Cuba embargo. You never know with this guy, you know, and that would be a logical next step for him to bring up. I wouldn't be surprised at the UN if he didn't bring up Iran and non-proliferation.
His main passion, though, is the poor.
I believe so. He's worked with the poor his whole life. He comes from a country that doesn't do a good job of looking after their poor and marginalized people. And I think that that perspective pervades the way he looks at everything else. And like I say, I hope that he sees in the United States a much different country with a real middle class. You know, he told a reporter last summer, when a reporter asked him why you don't ever say anything about the middle class, he said, I don't know much about the middle class, but I'm going to study up on it.
There was a bit of a dust-up with the invite list at the White House, and apparently the Vatican had some issues with some of the people the White House was inviting. What about that?
Well, I think they should have some issues. It's kind of rude and insensitive to try to use the Pope as a political football for what is a very extreme end of the progressive agenda. I mean, if King Salman were coming, you're not going to have people there that hate Saudi Arabia and what they stand for. If you know, they would be respectful of King Salman and try to, and you won't have people that, you won't have the Dalai Lama or people from Mongolia there when Xi Jinping's in later on in the week. So why would they do that here?
Yeah. Why do you think that is?
I think they're. I think the Chicago administration are experts in political theater.
The future of the Catholic Church, it seems like it has taken a turn under Pope Francis and definitely putting a different message out there. Did you think it needed a refresher, and how do you think it goes forward?
Well, I think it's exciting that the Pope has generated so much enthusiasm among the young and among a broader swath of Catholics that might have been a little bit removed from the Church. The atmosphere and attitude that he has put forth of embrace, of being less judgmental, of being warm and open, you know, basically making the argument that perhaps those who have sinned the worst need the Church more than ever, you know, and that we detest the sin, but we don't necessarily detest the sinner. I think that's a very interesting platform that he's put forth.
He's the first pontiff to talk to a joint session of Congress. He comes at a time when Congress is dealing with a potential government shutdown over funding of Planned Parenthood after these gruesome videos about allegedly selling fetal body parts and tissues. And today, they're voting on late-term abortion in the House. Does he affect that?
I hope he will. He may have an opportunity. I don't know if he'll step into that or not, but he's the ultimate protector of life in the world, and it would be, I think, important for him to make some broad statements about the sanctity of life. That's what the Catholic Church is all about.
And that's what conservatives would love to hear, while President Obama and his administration will highlight income inequality and climate change and that sort of thing.
Exactly.
Last thing, when you write this book, what's the message here?
I wrote the book because when Kathleen and I came back from Rome, I would speak about diplomacy and the Holy See, and I found that people knew very little of the role the Holy See played outside of theology in the engagement among states or in the world. And so I thought I'd write the book to maybe explain a little bit the important contributions they've made to diplomacy, and to make the argument that in the world we face today of these religious-oriented struggles and things, that the Holy See is particularly valuable. And lastly, that they're a particularly valuable partner of the United States. We're the only two sovereigns that are squarely founded on the natural rights of man, rather than our rights coming as a grant of some divine right monarch or a state.
Is the biggest battle they have against secularism?
Well, Pope Benedict would say that. This Pope hasn't spoken up so much about that. He's spoken up a little bit about rampant materiality, which is, I guess, a cousin to secularism. But ultimately, as I think Cardinal Wuerl said the other day very well, that secularism threatens the very fabric of the very moral fabric of society, and that the idea that there are no fundamental and unmovable truths, and even worse, that maybe the secular beliefs are the new fundamental truths. And I think that's very dangerous. You know, St. Augustine said one time that if we don't have truths and justice, we are nothing but a band of robbers.
Well, Ambassador Rooney, I look forward to this trip and finding out what exactly the Pope will say, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me on.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.